Talk about it with Franjez. Today's special guest is an indie animator. Today's guest is Bob Clark. Bob.
Hello.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hello, everybody watching, listening. I have no idea if you can actually see me waving right now. I have no idea who's going to be watching, who's going to be listening.
I hope it's millions. I hope this is the one.
Yeah. Everybody in the Westchester area, just drove off here from. We're right smack in Yonkers or something.
Yeah, right in Yonkers.
Yeah. Right underneath the Con Ed lines.
Yeah, right below them. Right below them.
Yeah.
So let's start from the beginning. Where were you born?
I'm from Rochelle, and right now I'm working, independently as an animator, and I'm here primarily to promote a number of screenings that are going to be done in the New York area, the New York metro area in the next couple of weeks. I have a film called Autistic Mode, which was done last year or toured last year in festivals. It was made through an Arch Westchester NEA grant, and it's like a collection of animated films by a team of all autistic animators, all of us trying to show our side of the autism spectrum in every kind of genre that we could think of. We have people doing video game inspired stuff, classic Hanna-Barbera inspired stuff. I have a big long science fiction detective story, and we also have a couple of very just personal autobiographical music video style things.
Nice.
It's a nice collection. It's it's sort of like an indie film version of Fantasia or The Animatrix, if people still remember that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Let's stick to the childhood for a moment.
Sure.
What were you into as a kid? What type of kid were you? Sports, TV, books?
I was mainly a movie kid pretty much growing up, and I'm realizing more and more that that's not everybody's experience, because when I was a child, I would be able to watch a lot of movies that I hear people talk about as being kind of slow and boring today, and it's weird because kids' attention spans are very different than they were years and years ago. I have a 5-year-old niece, and getting her to watch something can be a challenge sometimes. But there's the normal stuff that kids will be interested in, Star Wars or Indiana Jones. But I was watching stuff like Close Encounters and Star Trek: The Motion Picture. That always held my attention when I was 4 or 5. I talk to people today who they're in their 20s or their 30s or so, and they talk about those movies as though they're 3 hours long or something. So I was always able to I was always interested in movies, watched a lot of older movies too, like The Maltese Falcon or Casablanca. I think I first started watching anime at I discovered Akira with some older cousins of mine when I was about 8 years old. And you stumble on Akira after a diet of purely Disney cartoons and maybe Warner Brothers stuff. That's a big blast of energy that you want to find more of, because it's interesting. It's not just the fact that it's animation in a very adult sphere, as in sex and violence or anything like that. It's also just the fact that it's animation trying to show a sense of realism in the world that can be really kind of thought-provoking and interesting, especially when you combine it with characters who can range from being kind of realistic, as they are kind of in Akira, to more on the cartoony and cute side, which you'll find in, say, Project Echo or Evangelion or stuff like that.
What's Akira?
Akira is the probably one of the most famous anime films from the 80s. That was the one, that's the one that has the guy with the red motorcycle sliding into frame. It's all about kids who have been experimented on and triggering psychic powers, and it's famous for having lots of big explosions that are like taking out the entire city and stuff like that. It was like one of the first big like animes to like hit American theaters and American audiences.
And that was your first one that you ever watched?
That was one of the first. Like around in like the late 80s or so, you were able to watch some things that were like brought over to America and like re-edited. Like Macross was turned into Robotech, or a bunch of shows were turned into Voltron. That's the one where all the lions combine into a big robot. There were a couple of shows that were then put on like Nickelodeon for younger kids, like Noozles, which was about like interdimensional koalas and stuff like that.
Besides Nickelodeon, where would you find them?
Well,
was it like at VHS's at video
like,
stores?
Oh yeah. You'd find it in like VHS video stores, or you'd find it like I said, you would usually find stuff like that through like older cousins or if somebody had an older brother who had seen some of these things, that's how you get introduced to stuff like that.
How did you get it?
Like a couple of older cousins on a trip to visit them, like up in New Bedford. They had a copy of Akira, and we watched it right before like a blackout or something. But like,
what age was that?
I think that was like around like age 8 or 9 or something, and that's like Akira is like a pretty like hard hitting anime. That's the sort of thing like that. Like I eventually got that like as a birthday gift one year, and when my mom like found it, she was like, "Oh no, this is inappropriate."
Really?
Yeah, and like my parents were always sort of like had allowances for certain things, but it's interesting that like the allowances that you have for live action sometimes are not always the same as the allowances that you will have for like animation. Like my mom was never that bothered by like if I wanted to watch, say, like the Godfather films, because those are classic films. Any number of like movies that I was curious about watching about like Vietnam, my dad would be okay with. There were certain things that he didn't want to watch because he didn't want to like revisit that and everything. But I knew that there were some movies that he would look at about Vietnam and think, oh, that's a very good movie about it, like Full Metal Jacket. Obviously, like a 9-year-old should not be watching Full Metal Jacket. That was like a little later on. But like, probably one of the reasons why like she was a little apprehensive about a movie like Akira is that I also had a younger sister, and she didn't want her seeing that.
What's in the show? A lot of violence, I'm assuming?
I mean, there's violence. It's also like that's the one that's like also got like a lot of like body horror mutations. Like if you've seen, have you ever seen the Trapper Keeper episode of South Park?
No.
Okay, well there's a famous episode of South Park where a big part of it is just a big riff on Akira and somebody turning into a big blob of like mutating flesh. There's Akira and Ghost in the Shell. Those were both big influences on stuff like The Matrix and other movies.
Okay.
So like these are like.
So you can see why your mom would want her child.
Absolutely. That's why after a while you begin to learn how to keep some of those things hidden. Like by the time like I was like maybe say like 12 or 13, I bought a copy of like Blade Runner from Costco. I knew that like, okay, I'm just going to keep that in my room because I have a VCR now, and I know that this is not for everybody anyway. And like I had a whole treasure trove of stuff that I was into, and I had to sort of like, after a while you slowly begin to introduce, your family to some of these weirder things. Like, for a while it was like, we're coming up on Easter, and one of my big things around Easter is to watch Last Temptation of Christ, the Scorsese movie. And that's a pretty hard-hitting like movie for a religious film, although it's a very deeply felt film. But to answer your question before, like you would also find like around that time like a lot of anime on like cable broadcast. Like Sci-Fi Channel had a lineup called Saturday Anime.
Okay.
And they would show like stuff in the like on Saturday mornings. anime films and OVAs that were like slightly edited sometimes to cut out some of the more stuff that had to be like removed for like the morning or broadcast hours or whatever. But for the most part, you're getting the full movie, oftentimes in widescreen even. And Autistic Mode was inspired by a lot of stuff that I watched there, particularly a movie called Robot Carnival. That's very much another kind of like anthology film, which is like anime Fantasia. Each one of the shorts there has the loose idea of it's about robots, and each of the animators gets to do whatever they want, and that's it. And that was very captivating for me at like age 11 or 12 when I first watched it. And I also now can look at that and say that that is like an example of a really like age appropriate anime that pretty much anybody can watch. I have a 5-year-old niece, and she watches that movie religiously. She loves that movie. And I'm always excited when people get a chance to see that one too. And it's interesting because that's a movie and a number of others, but that one in particular, that one has gone from being a movie that was kind of rare and hard to find, and you would have to either find a copy of it on VHS in a store or just tape it whenever it was on like Saturday Anime or something like that.
Absolutely.
And now, you can just type it into your like Fire Stick and you can watch it.
Yeah,
you can watch it on Prime.
Where we are now in society, we have access to everything.
We have access to almost everything.
What don't we have access to?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of stuff that like you can only find on like physical media or stuff that becomes available for like a brief period, and then like this is one of the things you learn as like an anime fan sometimes is that like you are going to be region locked out of certain things.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's actually.
But I mean, with the internet, there's a way around everything.
Oh, I mean, there's a way around everything, yeah. But like during the DVD years, it was especially frustrating because
back then, of course.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting now, when say for like the past 15 or 20 years in Blu-ray, we actually share a Blu-ray region with Japan. And over the years, I've actually bought a few like Blu-rays from either Japan or Hong Kong because in Hong Kong, they tend to have a lot of the same products cheaper, and you can, they're smart.
Probably
they're
bootlegged.
Yeah, not necessarily bootleg. They just like, there's a lot of stuff that just becomes artificially more expensive, and a lot of people, even in Japan, will buy stuff from Hong Kong sometimes. But like, what's nice there is that in a lot of those cases, they will also make packages that have English subtitles attached to it because they know there's going to be an audience for that, and people are going to reach out and buy that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the childhood.
Sure.
So what's the home like? What's the music played in the house? What's the food cooked in the house?
See, the music in the house was like a lot of like, my parents' stuff was like Sgt. Pepper was like one thing, like a lot of Beatles. My dad is a big like Bob Dylan fan. On my mom's side, there's also like a lot of like people who liked like Beach Boys, like the Brian Wilson era in particular, like Pet Sounds. The stuff that I got into like those years after a while was like more like Sting, The Police, some of that stuff. Oddly, like most of the records that I remember us like going out to get is like not necessarily like recreational reading. Like my mom over the years has been like a big like children's theater person, doing a lot of shows, either doing stuff with puppets or doing stuff with like local theater programs that she used to have either independently or in the school system at Albert Leonard. And for that, she was always looking for like pieces of music that she wanted to be playing during her shows. So we would like go to like Sam Ash, or I can't even remember the names of these record stores because they don't exist anymore. But like one of the records that she often played was like a record of other people performing songs and music written by Nino Rota for Federico Fellini's movies. And she had one in particular that was like that was taking music from 8½, that she liked having, that was very kind of like upbeat but surreal kind of circus music that she would have for a number of shows that she would do. so that's a lot of the stuff that she was doing. Like, she was, she's always been like making props, making scenery, driving down the road and then stopping and like grabbing like big refrigerator boxes that, people had like dumped out on the side of the street because that's, material for making, scenery for shows and stuff. So like that was like a lot of the household, like growing up, just like being around art and materials and things like that, being around, matte knives from an early age and knowing, stay away from that because it's like a very useful tool to be cutting through cardboard and everything, but, something you have to be very careful with. Different like paints, markers, things like that. Talking about it here, it's like there are so many pieces of like Westchester that no longer really exist that people have had to find new avenues for. Like if you were an artist in like in the 90s in Westchester, you were going to A.I. Friedman a lot to buy your supplies. A.I. Friedman, I guess, like stopped existing about like 5 years ago.
With the internet, especially Amazon, it's just you have access to everything. Stores are probably going to be obsolete one day.
At a certain point, yeah. And like the difficulty there, of course, is that like the internet is good if you know what you're looking for. It's a perfect way to find like restocking things that you already know that you need.
Absolutely.
But like one of the great things about going into a big art store, and there are thankfully a few that are still out there, like Michael's is a good chain.
Yeah.
But like you go through an art store like that sometimes and you'll just be reminded of all the stuff that like you are going to need on a project, but you don't necessarily remember because,
it'll be in the same aisle and everything.
Yeah. I mean, like humans are infallible creatures and we have these like pieces of meat in our heads that remind us of all the things that we have to do. And you can very easily forget a lot of key stuff that you have until it's right in front of you. Like there was like one time like on a project that my mom was working on where she had to like do something that had like a lot of trees and like dinosaurs in the background for something. And she didn't have any, and it turned out she didn't have any green paint.
Oh.
I had to remind, I had to like at age 4 or something say, okay, we'll just have to just get all the blue paint, get all the yellow paint and mix it. And that's how we'll have the green paint. But like, that's what can happen sometimes, even when you're in a position where you're going to the store and picking stuff off the shelves. If you're just ordering stuff from the internet a lot of the time, it can be very easy to just completely forget. Like, I'm starting a new project right now, and, I've been like in a whole thing where I've been like drawing storyboards for the script that I wrote and making spreadsheets of all the different work that I have to do and scheduling it and making sure everything's accounted for. But one thing that I had to just remind myself the other day is that if I'm going to be doing all of this drawing on like digital tablets, I'm going to need to get a lot of extra nibs for the digital pen, the digital stylus.
What is nibs, the tip?
Yeah, that's the tip. Because like you forget about it because we take a lot of things for granted in the digital age, thinking that like, oh, these things are digital. You don't have to worry about, running out of anything. You're drawing all the time. You're wearing the nib down.
Wear and tear.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So after a while, you have to get that, replaced, especially because at a certain point, you're going to have a nib that's worn down, will still work, but has also kind of been sharpened, and you're going to run the risk of like damaging your equipment.
And the outcome's not going to be the same.
The outcome's not going to be the same, or it's going to be a little harder. And, like I said, you don't want to be damaging anything.
Yeah, 100%.
It's like, so like you have to remind yourself to go and like purchase those things.
Definitely.
And, if you're in the habit of like that's the other thing. Like if you're in the habit of going into an electronics store and stuff, sometimes you might be able to find these things if it's the type of specialty electronics store that also has a lot of arts equipment and not just wires and stuff. But even like, thankfully there is like one electronics store that I can think of called like Micro Center.
Oh yeah, in Cross County.
Yeah, in Cross County. But we're far removed from the day when you even had just like, Radio Shack everywhere.
Yeah, they used to be a Circuit City.
Yeah.
Where Micro Center is now. It used to be a Circuit City. There used to be Nobody Beats the Wiz. Remember Wiz?
Yeah,
Radio Shack,
yeah.
The stores that didn't transition to online sales, they're obsolete now.
Yeah.
Some stores didn't believe in the internet being a big deal. It's like, oh, we're not going to ship. We don't even care about the website. People know who we are. We're a chain. We're a trusted brand. But so then the companies like Best Buy and Amazon, of course, everybody that's selling online, they flourished.
Yeah, and it's funny like you mentioned, Nobody Beats the Wiz. A lot of people probably aren't even going to know what that is
100%.
now because like it's been so long since it even existed. And I have a lot of vivid memories going there, either for like getting like video game stuff, or then eventually I think like a couple of the first Criterion Collection discs I got were from Nobody Beats the Wiz. So they've all, they like had a whole range of stuff that you could get, like anime, stuff like that. And like now I feel like the biggest lasting like impact that Nobody Beats the Wiz has is in like one of the the last Hannibal Lecter book, Hannibal. There's like a guy who makes a joke about like he's a crazy psycho Christian or something, and he's trying to kill Hannibal Lecter, and he talks about how he's risen and nobody beats the Riz.
Wow.
And it's like, that's a joke. They kept it in like the new TV show with Mads Mikkelsen, but there's no like context for Nobody Beats the Riz. You only are going to get that if you grew up at that time, or if you're reading the book and they explain it sort of.
Only if you know, you know. That's
now,
the only way.
Right. Like now, if you hear somebody say Nobody Beats the Wiz, nobody's going to know it, or they're going to be some super obscure Hannibal fan who only knows it from the show.
Definitely. Let's get back to the childhood.
Yeah.
What was the food in the house?
I don't know, just like very like basic American dishes or whatever. Like my dad's always prided himself on making pancakes.
My man.
Yeah. And also like making them so that they get very thin. You like add like twice the milk or whatever.
That's how you do it.
Yeah, and
because
you
if
get
it's
very
too
thick,
it doesn't spread. It stays more clumpy. That's the key.
Yeah, and right, but also like traditionally pancakes are kind of like thick, but if you make them extra thin, then you can like stack them together or something, and it provides a different kind of texture.
I agree.
Yeah. However, I grew up allergic to milk, so I always had to have different kind of like milk alternatives. Like grew up with like soy milk, and then eventually they start diversifying to like almond milk. They're like people now, they have like oat milk or something, which I think I've tried once or twice, and it doesn't seem very appealing to me. Almond milk is kind of nice, and I have no idea how much almond taste you're actually getting, but at least it feels a little bit more serious than like soy milk. And it's something that, enough people out there seem to like, especially because it cuts down on cholesterol or something. Like the other thing like here, like is like, you grow up, having to like do like things like pizza or whatever. If you're growing up with a milk and cheese allergy is interesting because,
pizza's everywhere. Birthday parties.
Yeah, pizza's everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, and you have to make sure that you get a version of it without cheese.
And that sucks.
Yeah. I mean, like, if you grow up and you like find the right places that actually put some effort into their sauce, then it's not that bad.
Okay.
The thing is, most places, they don't really think about the sauce because it's going to be covered up by the cheese.
That's not a good place.
Yeah, and
There's
like
only 3 ingredients: the dough, the cheese. All 3 have to be good.
Ironically, places like Pizza Hut have always been pretty good at having decent sauce, probably because they're a big national chain and they have to account for kids like me who are going to be growing up and wanted to have a pizza party, but like they can't have the cheese. I don't know, but like one of the nice things also about like growing up in like New Rochelle is you have like a pretty good like diverse array of different types of food out there.
Yeah.
Like Mexican Corner restaurant is a nice place. Like you can always get like a lot of like good stuff there that is like isn't just like phoned in like like a lot of like national chains like
absolutely
like Taco Bell or Chipotle or whatever.
Yeah, because these chains are just chains. It's just business to them. But like a mom and pop restaurant, it's like their love and their ethnicity, their cultures in it.
Yeah, or like there's a Colombian place that I went to with a number of people a couple of times from like the library great food.
What's
great.
the name?
I can't remember the name. Okay. It's like right on like Main Street, but it's like great food, great coffee. A little loud, but that's also just something you have to account for.
That's part of it. Yeah, that's part of the experience.
Yeah, part of the experience, especially like during like football season.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to ever talk about food more, just jump in.
Oh yeah.
Food is my favorite thing.
Yeah, it's like when I was very young, we grew up like on Palmer Avenue, like in Larchmont. And there, like, one of the places that we went to a lot of the time was, like, Hunan, a Chinese place. Thing that's interesting there is that now, of course, that, like, most of the Chinese restaurants that used to exist, they've now expanded into having basically any kind of Asian cuisine that they can get. Because everybody's, like, looking to find sushi or anything.
Yeah. Japanese, sushi, Thai, all that stuff. Yeah, I love all that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So what was school like? Elementary, junior high, high school, anything stand out? Like, did you do sports? Were you into any classes
not so much sports because I had asthma.
Oh, okay.
I mean, like, now,
you don't have it anymore?
You never really lose it. You just find better ways of managing it and medicating it and better inhalers and stuff.
I was born with it too. I still have it.
Oh, yeah. It's like what's nice now is that there are medications that will kind of allow you to actually do exercise and like do something with that. But for years, like
the preventative
inhalers?
Like
the preventative, like there's a difference between like the daily inhaler versus like the emergency inhaler.
Yeah.
For the longest time, really all you ever had was like an emergency inhaler.
Absolutely. First it was survival. Then they figured out ways to adapt.
Okay. Wow. Didn't spill anything.
It's a nice little drop.
But one of the things that, of course, like for me is that like I grew up like in the 90s, so I was in the era of like Michael Jordan. So I went through a period where like, you grow up, you want to play basketball. That's a fun game to play, and it's also like a nice game because you can do a version of it yourself, just shooting hoops. But like in a school context, you're never going to go very far because if you're limited by that, and also even at like an elementary school age, people are looking for like the big tall kids to get them to get involved in stuff.
Absolutely.
Coaches even then are being very competitive.
Absolutely.
But like it was like in those years, what's funny now is like going over everything after like years and after receiving like an autism diagnosis.
When did you receive that?
That I received, say like maybe like 5 years ago officially, 10 years ago, like a more provisional version. And then it just took a long time, a little over 10 years ago for the provisional one, but it took a long time just to like find places that would do an assessment, without breaking your budget. Because those things like, things like that, psychological evaluations are like an expensive endeavor.
Really?
Like, oh yeah. Like
I figured insurance would cover stuff like that.
I mean, like sometimes insurance does, and sometimes it doesn't. Like I had to do mine through like something that was connected through like one of the local state programs or something that would specifically do it. But there are a lot of places where like people are just like cost prohibited on that. And it's funny, like when I was in elementary school, this to show like how far things have changed, I had a number of teachers who would say like every year to my parents, you need to get him tested. And they would then go to City Hall and they would say, yeah, we're not paying for that. And even insurance would say, we're not paying for that either. Partly it's, over the years, the different definitions of things start to change and the DSM updates.
What year were you born?
No, we don't really need to get into that, do we?
All right, we don't have to. But the reason I'm asking is
yeah,
because I went to school in the 90s, and it's like I never even heard the word autism. So I wanted to know, was it even a known thing throughout the school system?
Well, partly there's different terminologies. Like when I was in elementary school and middle school, I did have teachers and psychologists, and I was also seeing school psychologists from like when I was in elementary school or first grade or something. And
Did that word autism ever come up?
Asperger's came up.
Okay.
Asperger's came up a lot. Part of the reason why I didn't get a full evaluation around those ages, I think around like 13 is when there was really like an opportunity or a push, is because if you were going to get any kind of like school assistance at that age, you would have just been put into special education, and that was maybe one step above medieval torture back then.
What do you mean medieval torture?
I mean, like the special ed classes and programs that you had then were not terribly good.
Okay.
And like, like they lumped a lot of kids together, and
It was
things
definitely
like
a
that.
lumping
Right.
of everyone that they didn't know how to deal with.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that was one reason why like we didn't necessarily make a big push for it then. The other reason, of course, was I was really afraid of being bullied for it. I was already getting bullied, but I was really afraid of that at the time. I actually remembered after a while, like this is something that I forgot about for many years, but like around when I was like maybe 12 or 13 or something, and like my parents were beginning to openly talk about like autism in front of me, I remember saying something.
So they had an inkling, but they never knew?
They like I said, teachers were telling them that I should get tested.
They were saying Asperger's,
and
right?
they were saying Asperger's and autism because there was like an overlap even then. Eventually, Asperger's got folded into the autism spectrum completely, and even back then, the two of them were seen like, I think Asperger's was sort of seen as a softer term for autism for people who were on the spectrum but not nonverbal. But around that age, they were talking about these things in front of me, and like I thought that I had come up with something very clever by saying, "No, I'm not autistic. I'm artistic."
My man.
And that's like a very like clever thing to say, but it's also like a coping mechanism at that age.
Of course it is. Of course.
And at like, there wasn't enough space for like finding room to let kids just like connect with each other and socialize on their own. I think like eventually there were some of those programs in high school that would have been good to be a part of, but like in the in the middle school period especially, they really just kind of put everybody together, and they're not even, and they wouldn't even necessarily be like doing anything to educate kids a lot of the time. And if you had been slotted into special education, that would have made you a ripe target for any kind of bullying if you were also mainstreamed in any way.
Absolutely.
So these are all a lot of things that I was worrying about for many years. And it wasn't until, years later that I started pursuing it, because it was something that I wasn't quite as like worried or anxious or ashamed of anymore. There were a number of like, I can also remember there were a couple of occasions where like there were like psychologists either in college or in grad school who would mention it to me, and I just kind of ran screaming away from and not wanting to engage with that.
Did you have any problems in school, like education-wise? How did the autism affect you?
Socially, yes.
Socially.
Connecting with different teachers for a couple of years, yes.
What about work?
In terms of like math, I always had problems.
I think we all do.
Yeah, I mean, like certain things, like, autism is one of those things where very often you have very kind of like spiky spectrum of skills and deficits, because like I would have like the ability, like I would have like, advanced reading capabilities at an early age. Like I remember in kindergarten, I was able to read far enough ahead of the class that I would be a little disruptive, and I had to like sit out in the like hallway or like in a closet or something during the reading lessons just to keep me out of that. But like like I said, like math is one of those areas that you can very often have difficulties with, because it's a lot harder to visualize some of those things sometimes. But like in terms of like the social stuff, a lot of the things that like it's very difficult sometimes to know what the social rules are when you're like young at that age and you don't necessarily know how to interact with everybody. What seems like joking around for a while can be something that accidentally goes too far and you don't even necessarily understand why. It can be hard to understand like that kids very often will kind of socialize with each other almost through a type of like, you know, teasing or bullying that you don't necessarily pick up on until years later.
Sarcasm and all types of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarcasm. You know, there are a lot of things that like it took me years to understand what actually was being said to me when I was young and realizing, oh, wait, they were playing some sort of a joke on me and I didn't even recognize it at the time because, like, say if somebody tells you that their name is Casper, at first you think, okay, this person's name is Casper, and then you realize, oh no, they're like using the whole ghost character as some sort of way to pull a prank on you. To this day, there is a part of me that thinks, well, that's a fairly reasonable name to have.
It is.
But at that age, especially at that time, you know, you would probably run into a lot of people who were using stuff like that as some kind of a way just to like tease people or things like that. The hardest thing, I think, is also if you're not connecting with your teachers.
Absolutely.
I had a number of teachers like who were not very good at connecting with these things, probably because they just had no preparation for it and didn't know how to deal with kids who weren't necessarily connecting with everybody in quite the same way. Like from second grade on, of course, all of my teachers were pretty good and knew how to deal with different types of kids. By that point, you probably had a number of teachers who were trained in particular in dealing with kids who were somewhere, you know, on the autism spectrum, even before they necessarily had all the terms for it. And this is also around the years when things were beginning to change and people were beginning to notice these things. But like in like the late 80s and early 90s, you really didn't have much of an awareness of that even among adults.
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, the word I never heard until I was probably, you know, maybe a late teen.
Yeah, I mean, like probably the earliest like that a lot of people knew about it was stuff like Rain Man, and then later on you would have like a lot of different like characters and shows and movies and things like that.
Did they use the word autism in Rain Man? I've seen the movie. I just don't remember if they said the word autism.
I'm pretty sure they did. Yeah,
Okay.
Especially because like one of my favorite movies growing up, or two movies that I really liked growing up, were The Wizard, which is the movie about the little kid who plays Nintendo games, and Tommy, you know, the Who musical. Like that's the one about the, like, you know, he plays pinball.
Okay.
And there was a movie made about that with Ken Russell. It's like a big movie that has a lot of like rock star cameos. You have Elton John, Tina Turner, stuff like that. It's a very surreal kind of movie. What's interesting about that is that like in the rock opera and the show and the movie Tommy, he's always said to be after a trauma, deaf, dumb, and blind. The lead guy from The Who, I can't remember his name for the moment. The lead guy from The Who said later on that actually the inspiration of this was him reading about autistic children in the UK. So something like Tommy is very much like an autistic story, and you can recognize that even as you're watching stuff as a kid. Of course, a movie like The Wizard is something that is attractive to you as a kid because you get to watch a lot of Nintendo stuff. But you have a kid there in that movie who also is showing like clear signs of being nonverbal, being socially distant and uncommunicative. You know, and I later on found out that in early drafts of the movie, he was supposed to be just autistic, but they cut that out because Rain Man had just come out like a month before and they didn't want to be seen as like imitating them or something.
Absolutely.
You know, which is too bad because in one sense I would say a movie like The Wizard is sort of like a more useful for like if you're growing up with autism, because you can look at that and think to yourself like, oh, cool, he's playing Nintendo. That's fun. One of the first actually places where I encountered the word like autism in the wild, and this is probably around when I was like, again, 13 or 14. I'd picked up like the manga, like comic book of Ghost in the Shell. That's an anime. That's like a manga that was then turned into an anime in like the 90s, like an anime film by Mamoru Oshii. And also there's a TV show version of it, Standalone Complex. But one of the terms that they have in that manga actually is like for cyberbrains to like protect them from being attacked by viruses. They call that cyberbrain autistic mode. And I remember like that, that term made a big, like just seeing the word autism, I remember really spooked me at that age because I was trying to avoid it and avoid engaging with it. And because of that, I would look at that in the bookstore and put it on the shelf, and, I don't want anything to do with it. Also because I knew it was censored and I wanted to find an uncensored version of it later on. But that is where the term from, the title of the movie, Autistic Mode, comes from, because after a while, I began to really appreciate, after like going through all of Ghost in the Shell and everything, I liked the idea that here autistic mode was this sense of not just using the term as some sort of like clinical thing, but it gives it this sort of veneer of like cyberpunk cool that I thought was really nice. And it's something that I wanted to, use here in, I thought it would make a good title for something. And, thankfully, hopefully, Kodansha isn't coming after us or anything.
As a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Cartoonist, filmmaker, animator, that sort of thing. Like
you're living the dream.
Yeah, to an extent, yeah. It's difficult because like nobody tells you when like you're young that most of the people who are like working as filmmakers or working as artists or something, they're usually also doing a whole lot of other things in the meantime. Even all the famous directors that you can think of, with the exception of like really big guys like, say, Steven Spielberg, they all have side hustles of some kind.
The phrase is starving artist.
Yeah, I mean, like the one that really like stood out to me, or the ones that really stood out to me, like after a while, were like I always knew that like guys like Spike Lee did music videos and commercials, especially because like he tends to star in a lot of them. Martin Scorsese has done a lot of commercials, and Ridley Scott, who did Blade Runner, came up from the world of doing commercials, and David Fincher and people like that. What really surprised me was finding out that like more art house directors like Robert Altman or that's the main one, or David Lynch, a lot of them have did commercials for many years just to like pay the bills.
Yeah.
Like I knew that like Robert Altman also did a lot of like teaching on the side, which, makes sense. And he came up with a number of like film projects that way. But like the idea that like Robert Altman, I think I even read that Robert Altman occasionally directed car commercials. This is the guy who did like MASH and Nashville and like McCabe and Mrs. Miller and stuff like that. Going and directing like a car commercial, there seems to be something kind of absurd about that. Like at least when I read about the commercials that David Lynch has done, they tend to look like little David Lynch movies.
Wow.
Everybody, like if you're a David Lynch fan, you're a Twin Peaks fan, you know that he did a bunch of like Twin Peaks commercials for a Japanese coffee company, which is interesting, but it's all the Twin Peaks characters. That makes sense. But also the idea that like he did a lot of like cologne and perfume ads for like, what is it, Calvin Klein and Armani and stuff. All of the 80s cheesy black and white artsy commercials that people think of when they think of like a Calvin Klein ad.
Absolutely.
That's like all like David Lynch.
Nice.
So it's very odd to think of that. Like, but like that's the thing that like you have to learn how to like navigate later as an artist, that like most of the stuff that you're looking for is either going to be like doing your projects in between like teaching gigs, or if you're lucky, doing it in between like freelance gigs on other stuff. And a lot of those freelance gigs might be you work on something and then it never gets released, and you get paid, you're lucky. It's going to be that, or looking for grant money. And these are the things that you have to look for. And as much as people like start learning that, like say in film school or in college or grad school, I do think that those are things people are going to have to start really learning, start teaching kids like in high school or something.
The school system's not really built to really help us that much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the school system is always built to
make the working class, make the worker.
Well, it's not just that. It's also like it's built to teach people how to live in the world that the teachers were growing up in. So it's always going to be like about 5 years behind the times.
Makes sense.
And that's not necessarily a fault of the teachers. A lot of them are doing their best.
It's the school system.
And, they're often told how to do this while being given a budget that doesn't cover a fraction of anything. But, yeah, they're like, I can only imagine the things that people are going to have to learn now that they don't necessarily have the equipment for, simply because something that is going to determine the course of everybody's lives is going to be introduced to the market in, say, the next couple of months or something like that. And by that point, people's entire like career paths will have already been determined and chosen. Everybody's talking about AI now. Probably even that's going to be obsolete in a couple of years, and there's going to be something else that's everybody's going to be relying on. That's going to be the next new fad that people are trying to push on everybody.
What did you go to college for?
I initially went to college for like creative writing, literature. Then in like grad school, I went to NYU in the interactive telecommunications program, like focusing on game design, and also like you dip your toes into a lot of waters there. There's a lot of like art school stuff going on there, so you get into a lot of like animation, web design, things like that. But yeah, most of the stuff that I learned like there at ITP, the entire technological landscape has changed so much because like, what is it, a couple of years ago, like Flash just isn't being supported anymore. That was what like a lot of people's projects were entirely based on at the time. Now you have a lot of like open source software, which is great. People are doing a lot of great things with like programs like Blender, which you don't even necessarily have to pay money for in order to get some like good software out there. But a lot of the tools that people have depended on, especially things that are like very expensive and subscription model oriented, those things can completely change on you overnight, and you have to, completely reinvent how you're doing things,
What degree did you graduate with?
Some sort of master's. I can't remember exactly what it is. It's like, it wasn't Masters of Fine Arts. It was like Masters of Professional Studies or something like that.
What job were you trying to get after college?
Well, there was like more of a scene of like small independent game design firms in the city. Like there were a couple of them like in like, I guess sort of like in the meatpacking district area, the fashion district that used to exist. Then after like, the financial recession, a lot of them like dried up, and I can only imagine like after COVID, probably whatever ones that were left either went completely remote, and by going completely remote, you open yourself to, a whole bunch of people from, you're now competing not just with people who are in, say, the New York area. You're now competing with everybody who's graduating in like Seattle, Texas, wherever.
So was it easy getting a job after college?
No. It's like I said, it's like I feel like even the idea of having a semi-permanent job has almost completely gone away for people in our generation, and especially younger. Everything is now completely either gig to gig on a freelance basis, not just because you can't depend on the company to exist, but because a lot of those companies have realized that you can have a cheaper workforce by not hiring them on full time as much as you can. But a lot of them now, I feel like now, people are now looking for people who are like one-man studios. They want people who can do everything so they don't have to go off and make a whole lot of separate hires themselves. And it becomes even more dangerous when you think of things like, like I said, people using remote hiring to hire people from completely different places who are going to be cheaper. And now with like AI, just eliminating people from the job market entirely, even if you wind up with like a work product that isn't as good, people will look at it and say, well, at least we didn't have to spend that much money on it.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Mm-hmm. Big productions, even movie productions.
Yeah.
There used to be so many people behind the scenes. Now it's maybe half, even less.
Yeah. I mean,
AI especially, it's taking a lot of the small tasks away.
Yeah. A lot of the small tasks, and, it's very disappointing in the way that works out sometimes, especially because all of these things, like the movies themselves don't get cheaper. The movies themselves often will get more and more expensive, especially if people are relying on like boutique formats like IMAX to try and draw people to the theater. There's like a lot of good stuff that's being made that way, but like an IMAX ticket is not cheap. And you look at the things that people are trying to do now with like AI in different stages, and people like to make excuses for saying that like, oh, don't worry, we only used AI for like pre-visualization, or we only used AI for mood boards or stuff like that. Like I can stomach a certain amount of that for like just completely automated things if you have no other choice and you're on a deadline or something. But if you're an actual big production, you should be able to like afford certain things, especially because like AI is only ever really going to give you cliches. It's never really going to give you anything other than the visual equivalent of like, autocorrect. It would be very nice if we could find a way to use some of these tools to really enable people to make things that are going to be impressive for a lot of people. But generally, I feel like what we have to do, not only as artists, but also as audiences, is we have to be more open to viewing experiences that aren't necessarily like big AAA experiences all the time. We have to be more open to the genuinely independent style productions, the
real art. But at the end of the day, it's the budget. They want to spend the least and make the most in the profit. Yeah. So if we don't hire the artist, we just hire the AI guy. We save a big portion, and then we have the same movie, maybe even better.
Yeah, I mean, like the thing that scares me there is that there are a lot of great classics from the independent films of the past that I look at and think if they were being made in like today's world, AI would not necessarily help. Like I'm thinking of like, the movie Clerks?
Clerks, yes.
Okay, like, Kevin Smith's movie Clerks, shot grainy 16 millimeter black and white, and they're shooting the whole thing at night because that's when they have access to the store, and they have the shutters closed throughout the whole time because they had to just close the shutters so that nobody bothers them while they're shooting. And they come up with a great excuse for that in the movie to say that, oh, the shutter can't open, and they put a sign up there and stuff. If you were making a movie like that today, you would have so many people saying, oh, just do this with blue screen, do that with like, AI, and you can have whatever you want in like the window or something so that you don't have to do all these things. Those things like that are part of what charms an audience, because an educated audience goes into a movie like Clerks or goes into a lot of other different types of movies. They go into a movie like that with eyes that are aspiring to become filmmakers themselves. I feel like half the people who watched movies like Clerks went on to become filmmakers, or they at least wanted to become filmmakers. So they come with a certain amount of cinematic literacy built in. I wonder if now it's a lot harder for people to extend that kind of imagination to whatever movie or TV show that they're watching, simply because AI allows them to just be lazy and have instant gratification instead of actually working on something themselves.
I think it's just cheaper.
Yeah.
It being cheaper is I think, the main reason.
It's that, however, I will say it is an artificial cheapness.
Absolutely. It's in the name.
It's like, and not just that, though. Like, all of these artificial intelligence companies, they are intentionally keeping the prices on, like, engagement with people making stuff with it. They're keeping the prices on it as low as possible so that they can get as many people hooked into it right now. It's the same way that, like, in the early days of, like, streaming, Hulu was free. And a lot of these other companies had free streaming, and that was their big thing. Maybe you would have to watch ads, but it would be free. Then years later, like, Hulu, you're basically paying for the same amount as, like, a cable subscription to have Hulu and all these other things. So at a certain point, the price on AI it has to go up, or they're just going to be hemorrhaging money.
Absolutely.
In
the beginning, they get all the clients, and then they start showing premium stuff, right. And the budget gets bigger.
Yeah, it's and it'll be the .com bubble all over again.
Absolutely.
And each one of these companies probably thinks that they'll be the ones to survive it.
Of course, they all hope.
We'll
see.
Yeah.
So I think Google and OpenAI are at the top right now. Google's doing big things with the AI world.
Yeah, like Claude is the one that has been making a lot of news lately. What's interesting about Claude...
It's still too new, I think. I think it's not going to last.
Yeah, I mean, like, what's interesting about Claude is that it is actually being run by people who are, like, making somewhat ethical decisions. Like, they're the ones who have been, like, not wanting to have the Department of Defense use their AI for, like, any kind of, like, war-making decisions that are going to result in actual deaths. So it's interesting that they're a company that's willing to say, we're not crossing this line. What are the other companies going to be like in this regard? And there's a lot of ethical concerns in terms of, like, these AI companies just in general. Like, you see that on, like, Twitter with Grok and how people are using that to some, like, really disgusting ends, you know.
Absolutely.
And, like, like, right now it's the Wild West. At a certain point, people are going to actually have to have, like, legislation on these things. And when that happens, then a lot of the functionality on these things is going to be severely limited, and it's not going to be as attractive to people. Or they're going to start looking for the shadier alternatives if what they're looking for is that, shady, underhanded stuff.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Neo Westchester. What exactly is Neo Westchester?
Well, Neo Westchester is just, like, the production company name that I like to use. That comes from, like, again, like, going back to Akira, like, beginning of Akira, Tokyo explodes in a giant explosion, and then they rebuild and call it Neo Tokyo. And since then, I just like the idea of just having Neo Westchester as my thing, just because, one, it sounds good, two, I could come up with a good logo for it, and three, nobody else was using it. And, that's like half the battle already in terms of like getting anything is any kind of name recognition.
Tell us about it. What do you do with Neo Westchester?
Well, so far I've done Autistic Mode. Right now I'm working on another piece of animation that I'm hoping to get done by the end of the year, or at least get all the major work done by the end of the year. Going out and taking a lot of like reference photography of like just area things around here. Like, as soon as I came here and I saw like the Con Ed towers, I took pictures of that simply because, that's great. Take pictures of that, upload that to your computer and tablet, and use that as like, the beginnings of like background design or something for shots. Those are like really good looking stuff.
Nice.
For a while I was doing like a webcomic with the same name, but I don't really keep up with that anymore because trying to do animation work and freelance storyboarding work is like a whole job unto itself.
What exactly is the goal with it? Are you trying to get clients to create anime for them, or is it just your production for your stuff?
I would love to do any kind of like if there's anybody out there who does want to have any kind of like animated commercials or videos or things like that out there. If anybody wants to reach out to me, please do. I've done freelance storyboard art for different productions here and there. Most of it has been stuff that like doesn't go full ahead into actual like greenlit productions, but like, as long as you get paid, that's fine. Been doing also storyboard work for some live action productions here, like filmmakers in Mamaroneck. You look for like grant money sometimes for your own projects to support that. But, like I said, if there, anybody out there who wants to do, animated music videos or commercials, I'm always here.
Do you use AI at all?
No. I do everything in like a number of programs, but most of the assembly in it is done like in Storyboard Pro.
Nice. Mm-hmm. And where did you learn that? That wasn't in school, right?
Combination self-taught and SVA classes at School of Visual Arts.
Nice. Mm-hmm. So what is your goal with it? It's to get clients, but also to produce your own, and then with your product?
Well, is to do more independent projects like this, because there is more of a there are more and more independent animators and independent animation productions that have been going on for a number of years now, and now I feel like is a good time to really try and push in that direction. What I focus on in terms of my own kind of like independent animation work is I really want to push limited animation, the animatic, but like limited animation as a viable sphere for independent animation. I feel like in independent film, for years, you had people who were willing to accept black and white photography, handheld photography, 16 millimeters. People were willing to accept a lot of limitations for, a more affordable entry point for filmmakers. And that's how you had a lot of things like the French New Wave got started up. That's how you had like the independent films of like the 70s, 80s, and 90s in America really begin to pop up. What scares me sometimes looking at, say, indie animation as it exists right now is that a lot of it is very beautiful. A lot of very beautiful, well-done productions out there, but they're very highly budgeted shows.
Absolutely.
And I look at those and I think those, like, I don't hold it too much against them, because even like in the 90s, you had a lot of stuff like in independent film that was called independent, but if you do a little bit of research, like I love Tarantino and I love his movies. I love Pulp Fiction, Pulp Fiction was done at Miramax at a time right when it was owned by Disney. So that's a Disney production on one level. So you're getting like a fair amount of money, a fair amount of star power. That's not really an independent production in the same way that, like, say, Clerks was, being shot on whatever kind of camera you can afford, in whatever kind of location you can afford, in the wee hours of the night. That's like, there's a difference between Hollywood indie and working out of a garage indie. And I feel like we need to have room for that kind of independent animation out there, particularly because among the different types of film out there, animation is uniquely expensive, and it's always going to be uniquely expensive if you're going to have any kind of like crew or team behind it. And this is why, like, a lot of the productions out there that have a certain amount of money behind them, you don't like, that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's a lot of people out there who get angry at productions like that being called indie. And it's like, no, you have to understand that, like, the amount of money that goes into even making a small, like, 30-minute episode or a 10-minute episode, there's huge amounts of money that goes into that. And if they actually want to compete professionally and get picked up by a lot of these streamers and stuff, they have to make something that looks kind of polished. I do think, however, that if you can build a space for the grungier side of animation, that can be really good too. And it can make it easier for people to come up with something to show their work and attract more people to, like, come in and, like, help fund them and everything.
Absolutely. So for your films, where do you, like, what's the goal with it? Like, where do you want to get it into? Is it into independent film festivals? Is it just having your own fan base?
I mean, like, we've shown Autistic Mode in a number of film festivals last year, ranging from, like, Boomtown in, like, Beaumont, Texas. We, like,
you were there in person?
Oh yeah.
Oh, nice.
Took that to Texas. I took that to film festivals in, let's see, Massachusetts, Ohio, Vermont, a couple of other places. Like, what's nice now is being able to bring the film to some festivals here in New York, and also some, like, special screenings at, like, libraries here, because that at least cuts down on, like, travel costs and everything. But, like, being able to show it and bring it to audiences in, like, different places, it's great being able to show it and, like, share it with, like, people who are in completely different parts of the country and have it reach them and speak to them, and, just find, like, a passionate kind of, like, audience, no matter how small, in those places. But, like, you're always, like, after the next bunch of screenings, we're probably going to put it online and then, like, hopefully cultivate an audience for it there. Because so far we've just had it in a bunch of festivals. You tend to have to kind of keep it off of online platforms for that, because, like, they want it to be exclusive and things like that. But once we put that online, I really want to be able to have everybody's work there, because it's not just mine. It's like, it's my work on it, and the other filmmakers, I'm going to say them, like, the other filmmakers are Nix Busby, Charles Moss, Malcolm Thomas, and Gabrielle Tieford are the other directors on the project. They all directed shorts on it that are, like, fantastic pieces that I want everybody to be able to see at a number of these screenings. We also have animation by a friend of ours named Michael de Benenet. I think I pronounced that right, who did some of the opening intro animation for us. And, a project like this, and especially doing it as an anthology, it was done primarily because I grew up really loving Robot Carnival and wanting to do, like, a project like that, really liking the feeling of watching something that's one short and then another short. You get a real bouquet of different flavors. Wanting to do something like that in, like, the more indie style, and like also just show a broader range of what autistic artists and autistic filmmakers can be capable of. Because the nice thing about a production like this is that it isn't just going to be one person's voice. You're going to see a bunch of different people expressing completely different lifestyles, experiences, and that's especially important here because, like, when people talk about autism, they tend to picture somebody like me, white, male, of a certain age, certain range of interests. There's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily, who it's even harder to get an autism diagnosis because they don't fit into that paradigm. There's a lot of there's a lot of people who aren't being diagnosed because they're not white or because they're not male or, just a whole lot of things. And to be able to show a broader range of what the spectrum looks like and what people are capable of, one is, I think, a vital thing to be able to challenge the preconceived notions of what people have for the autism spectrum and neurodivergence in general, and also to just help people try and find work out there and, show everybody our portfolios.
Absolutely. When you say you're going to put the movie online, where exactly? Is it YouTube? Is it your own website?
It'll probably be put on YouTube.
Okay.
I'd love to find like a streamer that was interested in putting it up somewhere. A lot of people are doing things on like Tubi nowadays, and that's something to look into. But also basically everything is also on YouTube in some way, shape, or form too. I don't know if we'd be able to be monetized because my side of it being inspired by old school anime does kind of go into some of the more R-rated territory. But I don't know, that's just something that, you have to make the decision to push forward on. Are you going to be your most uncensored self, or are you going to be coming up with these weird little cutesy words that people use to avoid triggering the algorithm?
Absolutely. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you want to share with the people?
Let's see, other than I guess some of the specific dates.
Absolutely. Okay. Plug everything in.
Okay, yeah. Well, my portion of Autistic Mode, Dreamcatchers, is going to be shown at the Marvels of Media Festival at the Museum of the Moving Image, Friday, March 27th. You can see it there. You can see that part of the movie there. If you want to see the entire movie, however, with everybody's shorts included, you can see that at the Yonkers Library on Central Ave. I think it's the Wills Library. You can see that at the Yonkers Library on Central Ave on April 4th. That's April 4th. That's a Saturday at 1 p.m. It'll also be shown at the 6th Borough Film Festival in Riverdale at Manhattan University, I think at noon on April 11th, which is also a Saturday. And if you can't make it to that one on the same day, if you're in New Rochelle, you can see it at the New Rochelle Public Library at 2 p.m.
Awesome.
Yeah. So those are the places where you can see it. I'd love to see if we could get into some more film festivals by then, but before long, we're going to be putting it on YouTube and sharing it with people that way.
Awesome. How can the people find you? If it's Instagram, website, whatever?
On Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter, and all that stuff, I'm at Neo Westchester. And you can, also find links to our portfolios, everybody's portfolios on Linktree / Autistic Mode.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And any last words? It could be to people that are not diagnosed yet. Mm-hmm. Is it something good for them to do, or any last words you want to leave the viewers with?
There's a lot of people out there who don't want to seek active diagnosis because they can't afford it, because they're afraid of stigma in any number of ways. I would say if you want to seek any kind of like state assistance, it's a good idea to seek out like an official diagnosis if you can sometimes. And also, it just makes it a lot easier for any number of reasons if you're seeking out any kind of like, public art programs and things like that. There are advantages. It is also there are a lot of people who are also like worried about having like a official diagnosis in this political climate now, and especially with like RFK Jr. spouting off weird things about autism all the time in like the Department of Health or whatever he's doing. But I think in the long term, we are going to be living longer than this administration, and the future is going to be kinder to the people who are trying to make lives for themselves now. So I would say if you can afford getting an autism diagnosis, seek it out that way. I would also maybe be careful about some of the online people trying to sell people on like online assessments and stuff, because there's always going to be people who are going to try and con you, and it's very easy to be taken advantage of.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Peace and love.